Greetings, metaphysicians. This is episode 162, Disillusionment. And we're not just talking about conventional, more negative skewed disillusionment in this episode. We're also talking about disillusionment as a tool for awakening and all of the positive things that can come with certain types of disillusionment. Enjoy the episode.
You're listening to Let's Get Metaphysical. This podcast explores the spiritual and metaphysical world through the experiences and opinions of the host and those interviewed. It should not necessarily be seen as direct endorsement or personal advice to our listeners. We encourage you to use your own discernment, judgment, and intuition regarding anything you learn from this show.
Let's get meta.
Welcome to the Let's Get Metaphysical podcast. I'm your host, Renata Maniaci, here to remind you that you are an eternal spiritual being having a temporary human experience here on lovely planet Earth. Make the most of it. This is Season 7, Heaven on Earth, and this is episode 162, Disillusionment. Let's jump right in. Are you ready? Let's get meta. Masters and angels, I request your presence, guidance, and support through this episode. Please help these words to be useful to all listeners on their evolutionary journey. Let me know the truth, speak the truth, become the truth, and be the truth. And please let this episode reach whoever needs to hear it. Thank you with gratitude and full faith. Bless creation. Disillusionment. Now there's the conventional definition of disillusionment, which I will read in just a moment. And then there's a more cosmic definition that is coming in for our uses today. But either way, it's important to remember and to understand what disillusionment in our earthly conventional sense has been defined as. So I'm going to start with that. Disillusionment has been defined as the state of being disappointed or disenchanted, particularly when one's beliefs, ideals, or expectations are revealed to be false or not as fulfilling as previously thought. It often results from the loss of illusions or the realization that reality does not match one's hopes or perceptions, leading to feelings of cynicism, skepticism, or a more realistic, sometimes negative view of a particular situation or life in general. And so that's our conventional definition of disillusionment, and obviously slants toward the negative of being disappointed, disenchanted, moving towards skepticism, cynicism, things like that. And there are lots of different types of disillusionment, and I wanted to name a few here just so we can understand the breadth of where and in how many areas and ways this can come about in these lifetimes. Political disillusionment, when perhaps a voter who supported a certain political candidate based on certain promises of change might become disillusioned after the candidate is elected and failed to deliver on those promises. Career disillusionment, someone who enters a profession with high ideals only to become disillusioned by bureaucracy, politics, profit motives, etc. Relationship disillusionment. I'm sure we've all felt when individuals go into a relationship with high expectations of certain things like love and support, but become disillusioned when discovering their partner's true character or infidelity, or when the relationship doesn't fulfill their needs as they anticipated. And there's other things like educational disillusionment, consumer disillusionment, spiritual or religious disillusionment, which I think particularly applies to podcasts such as this of people who are listening are probably all seekers, just as I would expect that people who are in religions or spiritual organizations are also seekers. So this would be someone who might be deeply religious or spiritual, but becomes disillusioned upon learning about either historical inaccuracies, contradictions in religious texts, or witnessing hypocrisy among religious or spiritual leaders, or abuse by spiritual leaders. And that kind of disillusionment can happen with any other human. I don't know if there's a specific term for that kind of disillusionment, but the disillusionment that comes from being disappointed by another human, or thinking that another human was one way and it turns out that they're not. There's also another interesting one here, social media disillusionment, which they talk about. Users might initially see social media as a tool of connection and positivity, but become disillusioned by the prevalence of misinformation, cyberbullying, inauthenticity of interactions, things like that. So these are all just examples of different forms of what I'll call our human concept of disillusionment. And our culture, our popular culture, our stories, our movies, our narratives, some of our most famous stories are centered on disillusionment of some kind. And I did want to mention a few of those too. I mentioned a few episodes ago that I reread 1984 by George Orwell. Well, the protagonist in that story, Winston, starts out with hope for rebellion against the oppressive regime of Big Brother, and throughout the book comes to realize the extent of the party's control, which leads to his capture and torture and him to betray his love and to ultimately accept the party's doctrine. It's a huge, depressing story of disillusionment. We also have Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, disillusioned when he learns that Darth Vader's his father. There are so many other examples. Frodo Baggins in Lord of the Rings, initially full of resolve and hope to destroy the One Ring, and becoming disillusioned in the process and the corruption that the ring brings and the burden of it all. There's lots of different examples in popular culture. The Godfather, Shawshank Redemption, Breaking Bad, The Great Gatsby. These are just a few things that people listening might have heard at least one of, right? And there's so many instances of disillusionment in our own lives, not just our fictional stories and movies and things that we see on screens or read in books, but things in our own lives. And these things, I think, happen for a reason. I think happen in every human life. It would be surprising to me if any human made it out of this life without being or undergoing or experiencing the process of disillusionment in some form. And for me, the reason that this is the episode topic today is because this process is, I believe, part and parcel to being human. I have come to understand that disillusionment is fully part of the human experience, not just something that could happen. I feel it is written into our story, into our blueprint, into the plan before we incarnate, to become disillusioned, to support our own awakening, remembering, and realization of our own true reality. Disillusionment is part of the awakening process. It helps us to literally come through or around or over or whatever the illusion, disillusion, to take the illusion away. And while the way that we define it as humans does skew toward the negative, typically, does give examples of that would lead one down more cynical or skeptical paths. I also want to highlight the more soul version, the more divine, maybe cosmic version of these words, this word, disillusionment. And while in my own life, much of my awakening has come from potentially the more negative aspects of disillusionment. So that would mean similar to how the humans, how we on Earth define disillusionment as being more of the negative and finding out things that we had hoped for weren't actually the case, or what we had perceived as reality in a positive way was actually a different reality in a more negative way. And it is true that my own experience, a lot of my awakening, at least thus far, there's so many examples of my own awakening thus far that are in fact of that ilk. And I can give some examples too. That, for example, the people that we are told are saviors are actually not, and might actually be murderers. That the water that we're allowed to drink for free is actually toxic or poison. That the medicine that's supposed to save people actually kills people, right? That there are organizations that are meant to keep us healthy. That's their whole premise. That's the promise. That's the mission. But they're actually actively keeping us sick. And I could go darker and darker, like there's places that are meant to keep children safe that are actually putting children in danger. Things like that. And there's examples all over popular culture, things that I have read that it always flips. This is a trope. This whole idea that we're talking about is sprinkled throughout all of our books and movies. And, you know, the ascended are actually vampires. And there's so many examples in popular books or movies or TV shows, and you get to the understanding that the thing that you thought was good actually isn't. So I think I've made my point on that. But what I want to really go into for this episode is this idea, this more divine perspective of disillusionment, which I will define as coming out of illusionment, of seeing and perceiving reality as it truly is, and not only in a more negative sense, and also a really positive and hopeful sense in many cases. I said that much of my awakening has been at the understandings and realizations of things that were not the way that I had hoped. But a lot of my awakening has also happened because things are better than what I had realized or perceived, that they are more positive, that some people are more positive, that some organizations are more positive, that some, universal truths are more positive than what I had perceived before I awoke to them. And we see this thread coming through as well. We see these truths, these realities coming through also in our fiction and our nonfiction, in our lives around us. Severus Snape is actually a good guy. J.K. Rowling spent 7 books trying to convince us that he was the worst, but he's actually not. And that goes for any of these people, real or fictitious, that we are told are evil or bad, who are actually good. They're painted in such a way that we have disdain or fear of them. And in the end, it may turn out that they're actually good and here to help. And so this disillusionment goes both ways. And more than that, it actually goes all ways. I would say that this word expanded to include becoming just more aware of actual reality, which can be positive. This is a part, a huge part of being human. Disillusionment is part of the formula, the cocktail, the recipe of living a human life. And if we went through life without being disillusioned in any of those respects, what would it be? Would we have succeeded in growing? Would we have succeeded in evolving or awakening to our true reality? I don't know. All the examples that I gave, whether they're skewed positive or skewed negative, are all part of the process of understanding our true reality, of perceiving what is actually going on in our world, of becoming more aware, of being given the gift of awareness, the gift of truth. And why am I talking about this now? I feel like this is happening. It has been happening on a massive, massive scale. And maybe I just think that because I've been going through this. I've been understanding so many moments of disillusionment over the past, we'll say, 5 years. Maybe I'm noticing it because I'm going through it. Maybe this has been happening the whole time on a massive scale, and I'm just talking about it now because I see it now, which is another example of disillusionment, right? Maybe it's not happening at a greater rate now than it has been. Maybe it's always been at this same rate, but because I'm experiencing disillusionment, I can see it happening all around me in a way that I couldn't. It's like when you buy a car, you buy a certain brand of car that you've never had before, and all of a sudden you see them everywhere. I remember that when I bought my Subaru a couple cars ago. I bought it and I never noticed Subarus before, ever. And then all of a sudden they were everywhere. I mean, that too is a form of disillusionment. It's like you were under the illusion that that there weren't any Subarus anywhere, but then you got one and suddenly they're everywhere. It's the same thing with this. It's like, wow, I'm awakening to all of these new perceptions of reality and becoming aware of things that I wasn't aware of before. And now I see other people doing it too. I guess that's the whole definition of awareness. But what I'm trying to say in this episode is that that is part of the human experience. That's what I've come to understand, and what I wanted to share today is that this is an integral part. Some might call it awakening. I'm sure I have called it awakening. This whole show is really, the idea behind it, the whole purpose of it is so that we can help each other to awaken to our true natures, which is we are souls having a temporary human experience in a body, which happens to be on this planet at this time. So awakening is of huge importance to me, whatever that looks like. And I guess what I'm saying is disillusionment is part of awakening. This coming more into understanding of our true surroundings, our true reality, our true essence. Even when that means that we find out that things that we thought were one way are a different way, that people we thought were one way are not, that situations and organizations and governments and laws and beliefs and rituals and anything else you can throw in there, that those things that we thought were X are actually Y. Disillusionment is part of this process. It's part of the human experience, and it is part of awakening. And it is a trope over and over and over in our most popular pieces of literature and culture and art throughout history. I just have to bring this up right now because it seems pertinent, but so many of the things that I've been seeing and coming across lately, for whatever reason, and usually I'm a nonfiction reader. I really enjoy reading basically like nonfiction spiritual books or books about spirituality. Happy to I should probably give a book review at some point, or like a list of things that have helped me in my awakening process. That might be useful to some people, maybe not. But for whatever reason, a lot of fiction has been coming to me lately and being suggested, and I've been just eating it up. I've been so busy with other things in my life that I've allowed these fiction books to be my outlet for the last couple of months. And they're all fantasy and, built fantasy worlds, much like J.R.R. Tolkien built the Lord of the Rings world, and J.K. Rowling built the Harry Potter and Wizarding world, right? So a lot of the tropes that are coming about in these books are that you start with a mortal, a human, right? And then like throughout this process of discovery and exploring and action and love and romance and war and all of these things, whatever makes up the story, they find out that they're not human, that they're actually fae or high fae or angels or wizards or something other than mortal and human. Like the mortal and human becomes immortal and more than human. It's just such a common thread. I think not just to the things that have made their way to my bedside table lately, but also just in general. And why is that? Why are so many of our stories, however they're presented, whether in a book, a movie, a podcast, a TV show, or whatever, why are so many of our popular literature and culture stories that go from mortal to immortal? It's kind of like an underlying, hidden but ever more visible truth of why this podcast exists, which is to remind us that we are more than human, truly, not just in the wizarding world or Middle Earth or whatever other brilliantly constructed, fictionalized world there is, that in actuality, We are more than human. We are more than mortal. Just that our souls are eternal means that there is part of us, the essence of us, that is immortal. And maybe that's why this trope is so popular. And this also relates back to disillusionment, which is a part of awakening. Becoming disillusioned that we are only our body, that we are only our mind. There couldn't be anything further from the truth. And that's why I'm convinced that this is part and parcel to being human in a body in this lifetime, in any lifetime, incarnated in any lifetime. That disillusionment, and not just the negative, all of it, the positive, is part of the awakening process so that we can remember who we truly are. And on the path to discovering that, we get to see more and more realities of who others truly are. The roles that they're playing. Some of these roles were written for them to be evil, or to be murderers, or to be saviors, or to be presidents, or to be doctors, or posing as doctors, or whatever. Same goes for organizations. Same goes for what we're learning in school. Same goes for anything. On a level, it feels like most, some, or all of what surrounds us in this life is simply to help us wake up. We get put in these positions, we meet these people, we are part of these organizations, these religions, these spiritual organizations. We follow this person or that teacher or that doctor or that guru or that whatever, just to become disillusioned to who they actually are and what role they actually play beneath our perception, our initial understanding of who they are and what they represent. It's all part of the process and the plan for us to wake up. And so let's embrace that. I'm sure all of you listening can think of at least one example in your own lives where you became disillusioned in whatever way, positive, negative, whatever, however you want to judge that. But all of it, all disillusionment is awakening. All disillusionment brings us into further awareness of the truth. And may we all continue to wake up. Bonus content today is just that, a clearing of disillusionment, that we may all continue to wake up. You can find that on patreon.com/letsgetmeta. You can join any tier, become any kind of patron angel to access that and every other bonus content I've ever done. And I'm going to leave it there for today. As always, thank you so much for listening. Stay positive, stay safe, and stay meta.
The Let's Get Metaphysical podcast is an Up, Up, and Awaken production and is produced and hosted by Renata Maniaci. Our intention is to raise the vibration of the planet by sharing, validating, and normalizing spiritual and metaphysical experiences. The Let's Get Meta podcast is inspired by angels and supported by angels. If you would like to be an angel donor to the podcast, visit patreon.com/letsgetmeta. Thank you for listening. Stay meta.
Let's get meta.
Metaphysical.
Let's get meta.
Metaphysical.
Let's get meta.
Metaphysical.
Let's get meta.
Metaphysical.